Hi everyone, it's Alex from Risk Academy, and I don't remember how it started, but I wanted to talk about the risk perception and the psychology of risk management. So I don't remember how it started, but about 10 years ago, when I was the head of risk of a large sovereign fund, I did, together with Deloitte Russia, I did a risk breakfast when I collected about 60 risk professionals in the country, and I did a presentation on cognitive biases. And I can't remember how it kind of started. I think Kahneman's book was obviously a big turning point, but somewhere I stumbled upon this whole field of study called risk perception and the psychology of risk, and that just uncovered the whole new parallel world to me, because no one talked about it in risk management at the time. The fact that you can try all you want with different risk workshops and risk identifications, but the reality is the way human brain works and the way chemicals interact inside our head influences significantly how people will perceive risk, how people will see risks, why many executives don't see the risks even though they're obvious to everyone else, why people don't recognize the necessity to mitigate risks even though it's obvious to everyone, why even after you've discovered the risks and you came up with the solutions, you brought the recommendations, and people still don't do anything about it. Most of those things actually have a chemical explanation, like a medical explanation why this happens, and it's absolutely bizarre. And another fascinating thing, why having a risk workshop just before lunch or having a risk workshop at the end of the working hours is literally meaningless, because people will find it almost impossible, despite all their best intentions, almost impossible to switch from system 1 to system 2 thinking. Why it's absolutely critical to have little snacks at the executive meetings or board meetings, why you can't have risk committees on an empty stomach. There are so many fascinating findings in this field of study. So many years ago I came to that, and I've been fascinated ever since. So here I wanted to talk in this video, I want to talk about 3 different worlds of risk perception, because even in that field that seems kind of pretty self-explanatory, because there has now been 2 Nobel Prizes in 2012 and 2017. Kahneman and Smith won in 2012, and Tyler, was it 12 or 2002? Sorry, I keep forgetting. And Richard Thaler won in 2017. Nobel Prizes in economics for making decisions under uncertainty, and in fact uncertainty has, basically for risk management. The fields were so fascinating, but later as you kind of dwell into that, you discover that there's much more to the study than it seems meets the eye, because the school of thought that Kahneman and one of my favorite authors, for example, Dan Ariely, an Israeli scientist, pushes, that humans are predictably irrational. And in fact, a similar school that Thaler is continuing is that you can influence human behavior by understanding the effect cognitive biases have on decision making, and kind of nudging or pushing them towards a particular behavior. And you can structure your products and your pricing and everything else with that in mind, and you can interact with people and help them identify risks, and so on. So this is a fascinating school of thought, and that in certain conditions, quantitative tools provide a huge amount of extra insight that human intuition is just incapable of processing. So that's one school of thought, and then there's another school of thought. It's probably spearheaded by many scientists, but I only know Göge Rinzer, the German scientist who kind of made it very popular through his book and through his TED Talks and other presentations. Is that his idea is that, well, maybe humans are not that irrational, and in fact there are certain heuristics which basically tell us that if something worked for centuries, if something has been proven over time, then regardless of what you think something is rational or irrational, that's the right thing to do. For example, usually we have like all those grandma's tales don't put all the eggs in the same basket. I mean, that kind of communicates the general principle of diversification. And the reality is, it seems that a number of tests have shown that diversification is still one of the best risk management techniques. I mean, you can apply complex algorithms, but if the level of uncertainty is high enough, you would actually do better with a simple heuristic than you would do with a complex algorithm. So that's, again, a fascinating direction of study, which I highly recommend to risk managers to read. And Gagarin's book is called Risk Savvy, is one of his kind of more pop cultured books, more easy ones to read. But his studies are fascinating as well. I mean, he's been conducting a lot of research in that direction, saying that sometimes if the uncertainty is high enough, that means your model is probably, despite your best efforts, is not going to be too realistic. So heuristics are no worse, or sometimes even better. And then there's this third school of thought by Nassim Taleb, which I find this fascinating and I love it. But he's basically saying, if there is a chance of ruin, if there is a possibility of a collapse, if the uncertainty is so high that there could be a fat tail hidden there, that basically you just don't know whether something may go horribly wrong, and there's a probability that something will go horribly wrong, then you just have to then you have to protect your downside no matter what. And again, this is a very complex message to dissect in a small video. He wrote a whole series of books around that, and Anti-Fragile is his key message on that idea, is that if there is a chance of ruin, you have to protect your downside. And it actually doesn't matter if you understand the true extent of risk or you don't understand the true extent of risk. And unless you understand the true extent of risk, the risk stays high, which is, again, very counterintuitive, because, I mean, this is how executives think. They think, well, this is a good project. Now, you, risk manager, prove to me otherwise, that this is not a good project. Show me through your analysis that the risks are significant. But that's actually not how the world works. I mean, anything uncertain is high risk by definition until proven otherwise. And the honor is kind of on the executive to prove that he understands the risks and he's taking them into account, and the risks are reasonable for the level of reward that he's taking by making that decision. So, sorry for this long video, but I find this whole area of risk perception and risk psychology absolutely fascinating. It is truly critical for the risk managers to understand and appreciate and take it into account when integrating into decision making, because literally the second you try to integrate into decision making, you almost hit in the face with all the cognitive biases and why people just do not listen or hear what you're trying to say. And it's actually not because you're bad or they're bad people. There's basically a medical explanation why that happens, and ignoring that is just silly. But that area of risk perception is quite complex as well. It's not straightforward. There are studies that basically say that if the uncertainty is kind of moderate and the price of the decision is high, and you're able to replicate that decision in a model, and your model is okay, then you're better off using quantitative tools, because you will be more rational than human intuition. However, if the level of uncertainty is much higher and you are unable to produce a model that will replicate the future realistically, then you might as well just rely on some old heuristics, some old grandmother's tales, and just being safe rather than sorry. And the final thing is, if you have no idea, if something is completely new, then the best you can do is probably just to protect your downside. Don't invest too much at the same time. Take it a gateway approach. Don't do it all at once. Pilot, diversify. You buy insurance if it's new, complex, and uncertain, and so on. So I find those studies fascinating. I highly recommend the books by Kahneman, Dan Ariely, Georg Gagarinza, and Taleb, obviously. And I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. Do share underneath this video. And don't forget to subscribe to the Risk Academy channel on YouTube.